Story 1.
I've been out of the Ranger service for 2 years now. Retirement, they call it. A chance to rest the old bones, to stoke the fire in the hearth, not a campfire under the open stars. Here in my cozy living room, with its walls adorned with photographs of family and the odd mounted deer head, a testament to my days in the wilderness, the comfort is almost overwhelming. The soft, worn armchair hugs my form, a stark contrast to the unforgiving ground I used to sleep on during my ranger days. Outside, the night is creeping in, swallowing the last remnants of daylight. The world outside the window transforms, the familiar becoming unfamiliar. Inside, the room is awash with the warm glow of the fire. My family, a tapestry of generations, gathers around, creating a cocoon of love and safety. My grandchildren, with their curious eyes and untamed energy, are a source of endless joy. The youngest of them, Lily, a sprightly girl with hair the color of sun-kissed wheat, shuffles closer to me, her eyes wide and expectant. "Grandpa Carl, tell us a story. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen?" she implores, her voice a delicate melody in the quiet room. Her request sparks a chorus of agreement from the others. I can't help but smile, feeling a mix of nostalgia and a tinge of something else, a shadow of unease perhaps, as memories of my past adventures in the wilds resurface. "You want to hear about the time your old grandpa used to work the wilds as a ranger, huh?" I ask, already knowing the answer. Their eager nods and wide eyes are all the confirmation I need. Settling deeper into my chair, I gaze into the fire. The flames dance and flicker, casting playful shadows that transform the room, and in my mind's eye, they morph into the trees and creatures of the forest. "You know, kids," I start, my voice a gentle rumble in the quiet room. "Every forest in this world, it's a living organism. Got its own character, its own mood." I pause, letting the weight of my words settle in the room. The children lean in closer, their eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Sometimes it welcomes you," I continue, wraps you in its peace and beauty. "But other times?" My voice trails off, and I swallow the lump forming in my throat. "Other times, it bares its teeth, brings danger, reminds you that you're a guest in its vast wilderness." The room falls silent, the crackling of the fire the only sound. I take a deep breath, tasting the air, heavy with the scent of burning wood and a hint of cinnamon from the apple pie cooling in the kitchen. "In my years as a ranger," I say, my voice barely above a whisper, "I've seen things in the forest that I can't explain. Things that would make your skin crawl, your heart race. Things that are better left unsaid." I notice the children's eyes widen, a mix of fear and fascination etched on their faces. It's a look I know well, one that I've seen in the eyes of fellow rangers when we shared tales of our encounters in the wilderness. "Like what, Grandpa?" Lily's voice is a small, trembling leaf in the still air. I hesitate, wondering if I should continue. But the story has already begun, and there's no turning back now. With a slow, deliberate motion, I stoke the fire, sending a cascade of sparks up the chimney. The flames grow higher, casting eerie shadows across the room. "Well," I say, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart, "there was this one time, deep in the heart of the forest, when I stumbled upon something. Something unnatural." The children are silent now, hanging on my every word. I take a moment to collect my thoughts, to sift through the memories until I find the one that haunts me the most. "I was a young man, green as the summer leaves when I started as an assistant chief ranger in the national park," I began, allowing a trace of whimsy to color my tone. Each word I uttered was a step back in time, to an era that seemed as distant as the stars twinkling outside my window. "It was a calling, not just a job," I mused, feeling a familiar stir of pride. I glanced around at their captivated faces, each a canvas of innocence and wonder. But one event from those days still chills my blood. I let the words hang, savoring the suspense that settled over the room like a delicate mist. The fire crackled in the hearth, a symphony of snaps and pops that underscored the silence. I drew in the smoky air, letting it fill my lungs, a tactile reminder of those bygone days. "Mid-July it was, sweltering like the devil's own breath," I continued. "I was fresh, perhaps too eager, brimming with the zeal to make my mark, to safeguard the forest I so dearly loved." I paused, allowing myself a moment to relive the palpable excitement of my youth. What happened, Grandpa? Ben, my oldest grandson, leaned forward, his eyes bright with curiosity. His eagerness mirrored my own from decades past. The fire's glow shifted, casting ghostly patterns across the room. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest as memories, long dormant, began to stir. "Let's take it slow, kids," I cautioned, my voice a low rumble. "This is a tale that demands patience." Every morning in those days began with the ritual of preparing coffee. I would grind the beans by hand, savoring the rich aroma that filled my modest ranger's cabin. The coffee was strong and black, a vital kickstart for the long days ahead. Breakfast was a simple affair, usually a piece of fruit or a slice of bread with peanut butter, consumed while poring over maps and reports. The park was a living tapestry of greens and browns, an ever-changing landscape that was both my office and my sanctuary. The days were long, filled with the sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. My tasks varied, from patrolling the well-trodden paths to the less glamorous work of clearing fallen debris and maintaining signs. Evenings found me back in my cabin, a modest structure of logs and stone nestled in the heart of the forest. Here, I would unwind, often with a book or my journal, jotting down thoughts and observations by the flickering light of an oil lamp. Dinner was typically a Spartan meal, perhaps a can of beans heated over my small stove or a simple stew if I'd had the foresight to prepare it earlier. There was a rhythm to that life, a satisfying predictability punctuated by moments of unexpected beauty. A deer sighting at dawn, the sudden bloom of wildflowers, the ethereal mist that hung over the forest in the early morning. I found contentment in these simple pleasures, eager to absorb the wisdom of my more seasoned colleagues. They were a rugged bunch, each with a story etched into the lines of their faces and the calluses of their hands. These veterans of the wilderness welcomed me, a greenhorn, into their fold with a mix of good-natured ribbing and earnest mentorship. They taught me the intricacies of our duties, how to track animals, read the weather, and navigate the sprawling, untamed expanse we were charged with protecting. As the months cascaded into one another, I grew into my role, my footsteps becoming more confident with each patrol. The forest began to seem like an old friend, its secrets gradually unfolding before me. But with this growing confidence came a hint of overzealousness, a subtle shift in my perception of the woods and my place within them. I remember distinctly the day it happened. It was a day like any other, the morning air crisp and the sky a clear blue canvas. I set out on my patrol with a spring in my step, armed with the knowledge and skills imparted by my colleagues. Yet, beneath the surface of my routine, a current of overconfidence was swirling. I ventured deeper into the forest than I ever had before. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches interlocking like the fingers of a giant hand above my head. The light dimmed as I progressed, the sun's rays struggling to penetrate the dense canopy. I was entranced by the beauty of it all, the sense of being completely enveloped by nature. Lunchtime found me beside a babbling brook, the water cold and refreshing as I splashed my face. My meal was simple: a sandwich of thick-cut bread and cured ham, a flask of black coffee, and an apple, its skin glistening in the dappled sunlight. I sat there, lost in the serenity, the sound of the water and the rustling leaves a natural symphony. The afternoon wore on as I continued my journey. The forest seemed to grow denser with each step, the underbrush thicker, and the terrain more rugged. I was far beyond the familiar trails and markers, in a part of the park that few had tread. It's a memory etched in my mind with the clarity of a frosty morning. The air was dense, filled with the musk of damp earth and decay, an olfactory reminder of the forest's perpetual cycle of life and death. Alone, with only the sound of my own footsteps for company, the forest's usual serenity morphed into something more sinister. The absence of human noise, usually a solace, now rang in my ears like a warning bell. Every rustle, every snap of a twig underfoot seemed amplified, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, watching my every move. And then, almost as if by design, I stumbled upon it. A small hill, nestled between the towering oaks, draped in a shroud of thick undergrowth. Atop this natural hillock sat its crown jewel, a cave, its mouth wide and dark, like a gaping maw ready to swallow me whole. I stood there, frozen, a young ranger confronted with the unknown. The mouth of the cave beckoned, an unspoken invitation that pulled at my very soul. It was as if the cave itself was alive, its dark void pulsing with an unseen energy, whispering my name on the wind. The rational part of my brain screamed warnings. Caves were the domain of wild animals, a sanctuary for the predators of the forest. It could be a bear's den, or worse, home to something unknown, something lurking in the depths of the earth. The risks were clear, yet the allure of the unknown was almost magnetic. I remember the internal battle that waged within me. Curiosity gnawed at my resolve, a siren call to explore the hidden depths of the cave. Yet, caution, that ever-present guardian, held me back. The teachings of my seasoned colleagues echoed in my mind. Respect the wilderness, understand its dangers. With a heart heavy with unfulfilled curiosity, I turned my back on the cave. The decision was a physical effort, like tearing away a part of myself that yearned for the unknown. As I walked away, the whispers seemed to grow louder, a chorus of unseen voices bidding me return. But I pressed on, the underbrush closing behind me, sealing the cave and its secrets away. The ranger hut, usually a place of camaraderie and light-hearted banter, was shrouded in a somber atmosphere as I relayed my encounter with the cave. My colleagues, a group normally unfazed by the mysteries and dangers of the wilderness, were visibly shaken by my tale. Their reactions, a mix of concern and fear, were a stark contrast to the jovial mood that had preceded my story. Bari, the senior ranger, a man whose words were as scarce as rain in a drought, reacted with an intensity that startled me. His usual stoic demeanor was replaced by a palpable sense of agitation. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor, his voice a low rumble of concern. "Did you see any warning signs, Carl? Did you see anything that said you shouldn't be there?" His question caught me off guard. "No," I replied honestly. "There weren't any signs." Bari's reaction was immediate. His eyebrows, bushy and unkempt, knitted together in a frown of worry. He began pacing the room, a caged animal, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. His hands, rough and calloused from years of service, ran through his thinning hair in a gesture of deep anxiety. Finally, he stopped, turning to face me. His eyes, usually a calm pool of wisdom, were now stormy with concern. "Listen here, boy," he said, his voice stern. "You're never to go near that cave again. Do you understand? That part of the forest is strictly forbidden. It's dangerous." His words struck a chord of fear in me, but my curiosity was undimmed. "But why?" I pressed, unable to quell the inquisitive nature that had drawn me to the forest in the first place. Bari sighed, the weight of his years evident in the gesture. A look of deep sorrow etched his weathered face, as if he was recalling a painful memory. "That cave," he began, his voice low and grave, "has been here for centuries. No one knows how deep it goes or what lives within it. All we know is that whoever enters never returns. Man, beast, bird, none who venture in ever come out." His revelation sent shivers down my spine. The cave, which had seemed merely a curiosity, now loomed in my mind as a place of dread, a sinister enigma. "Carl," Barry's voice softened, "avoid that part of the forest. We've lost good men to that damned cave." His words were a whisper, a confession of sorts, carrying the weight of unsolved mysteries and unspoken fears. The rest of the evening was steeped in a heavy silence. The usual routine of the hut, the preparation of dinner, the sharing of stories, was subdued. We ate in quiet reflection, the food, a simple stew of vegetables and venison, tasting bland in our mouths. In the years that followed, I followed Barry's advice, staying away from the forbidden part of the forest. The cave, with its dark allure and sinister mystery, became a no-go zone, a place etched in my memory but absent from my patrols. As a ranger, my duty was to safeguard the wilderness, a role I embraced with dedication. The forest was my charge, a living entity that I was sworn to protect. I respected its boundaries, both seen and unseen, adhering to the natural order that governed its existence. Life in the park continued, marked by the steady rhythm of the seasons. The summers were a vibrant display of green, the forest alive with the chatter of wildlife and the rustle of leaves. Autumns brought a cascade of colors, the trees shedding their foliage in a final spectacular show before the onset of winter. The winters were silent and solemn, the snow blanketing the ground in a pristine white, muting the sounds of the forest. And then spring would arrive, breathing new life into the world, the cycle beginning anew. I patrolled the trails, ensuring the safety of visitors and the health of the park. I monitored the wildlife, noting changes in their behavior and habitats. I maintained the park's infrastructure, repairing trails and signs. As time marched on, I felt myself change. The young, eager ranger, once filled with a sense of adventure and curiosity, matured into a seasoned guardian of the forest. My steps became more measured, my eyes keener, my understanding of the wilderness deeper. The park, too, underwent changes. New trails were blazed, old ones retired. The flora and fauna adapted to the shifting climate, an unspoken reminder of the passage of time. Visitors came and went, each leaving their footprints on the trails, a transient mark on the timeless landscape. With Bari's retirement, the mantle of senior ranger fell upon my shoulders. It was a role I accepted with a mix of pride and trepidation, aware of the immense responsibilities it entailed. I now had jurisdiction over the entire park, including the mysterious, forbidden part of the forest where the cave was located. I took my duties seriously, ensuring the safety of hikers and wildlife alike. The trails were my domain, each path and clearing familiar to me as the lines on my own hands. The signs warning off the curious from straying towards the cave were always prominent, a constant reminder of the unseen dangers lurking within the forest. I also took it upon myself to share the legend of the cave with every new recruit. It was a story that needed to be told, a cautionary tale to instill vigilance and respect for the untamed heart of the wilderness. One such new recruit was Steve, a young man brimming with the vitality of youth and an eagerness to learn. He had a sparkle in his eye, the kind that spoke of dreams and aspirations yet to be fulfilled. I saw in him a reflection of my younger self, and it stirred a sense of responsibility within me to guide him, to temper his enthusiasm with the wisdom of experience. I remember the day I first took Steve on patrol, the sun just cresting the horizon, bathing the forest in a golden glow. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and earth mingling in a heady perfume. We walked the trails, my strides measured, his eager, as I pointed out the various flora and fauna, the subtle signs of the forest that revealed its secrets. Steve was a quick learner, absorbing the knowledge I imparted like a sponge. He took to the routines of ranger life with enthusiasm, whether it was checking trail cameras, maintaining paths, or conducting wildlife surveys. His presence brought a renewed energy to the team, a reminder of the passion that had drawn us all to this life. But when it came to the cave, I noticed a flicker of fascination in Steve's eyes, a glimmer of the same curiosity that had once drawn me to its maw. I reiterated the warning, my voice grave. Remember, Steve, that cave is off limits. Its secrets are not ours to uncover. The day began like any other, the sun peeking over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the forest. But that tranquility shattered with a crackle of the radio, the excited voice on the other end delivering news that turned my blood cold. Several hikers, along with Steve, had gone missing. The pit of my stomach dropped as they relayed their last known location, perilously close to the restricted area of the forest. Anger surged within me, a turbulent river of emotion. I was furious at Steve for his recklessness, at myself for trusting him too much. But anger wouldn't solve this crisis. Action would. I gathered my gear with a sense of urgency, each item, the compass, the flashlight, the first aid kit, feeling heavier with the gravity of the situation. As I trekked towards the restricted area, my initial anger gradually morphed into a gnawing worry. The safety of Steve and the campers weighed heavily on my mind, their well-being a responsibility that rested squarely on my shoulders. I tried to maintain a clear head, pushing aside the burgeoning dread that sought to cloud my judgment. The journey through the familiar trails was a silent one, the usual chorus of the forest muted as if in anticipation of what was to come. I walked with a purpose, my steps brisk, my senses heightened. The forest around me felt different, almost sentient, as though it was aware of the gravity of my mission. Crossing into the forbidden zone was like stepping into another world. The air shifted, becoming denser, laden with an unspoken warning. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with a strange energy, a force that seemed to pull me inexorably towards the hill, towards the enigmatic cave. This force, this inexplicable draw towards the cave, was unsettling. It felt as though invisible threads were tugging at me, guiding me towards an uncertain fate. The rational part of my mind screamed against it, warning of the dangers that lay within the dark recesses of the cave. But another part, a primal, curious part, whispered seductive promises of discovery and understanding. I halted, a battle raging within me. The memory of my last encounter with the cave's power loomed large in my mind. I had been fortunate to escape its grasp then, but would I be so lucky this time? The thought of being ensnared in its tantalizing web was both terrifying and compelling. But my hesitation was brief. The realization hit me with the force of a thunderclap. As Chief Ranger, it was my duty to find and rescue those under my charge. I couldn't allow fear or superstition to deter me from my responsibility. The abandoned campsite lay in a small clearing, a scene of chaos frozen in time. The tents, once a safe haven for the missing hikers and Steve, now stood desolate, their flaps open and fluttering in the icy wind. Belongings were strewn about, a silent testament to a hurried, panicked departure. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, the sense of urgency palpable even in their absence. I approached the campsite with a mix of trepidation and determination. My eyes, honed by years of experience, scanned the area meticulously. I noted the position of the tents, the scattered gear, the half-eaten food on a makeshift table. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, a clue to the events that had transpired. The air was chilly, the wind carrying whispers of leaves and the subtle scents of the forest. The silence was pervasive, broken only by the occasional creak of a branch or the distant call of a bird. It was a stark contrast to the usual symphony of the wilderness. I felt a wave of unease wash over me as I surveyed the scene. Something had driven them from this place in haste, something more fearsome than the typical threats of the forest. The cold dread that seeped into my bones was a familiar sensation, one that I had felt years ago when I first encountered the cave. The campsite's proximity to the cave was no coincidence. I could sense the ominous presence of the cave, its dark maw beckoning me, pulling me towards it with an almost magnetic force. The dread in my stomach twisted tighter with each step I took towards the cave. A part of me yearned to turn back, to escape the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the area. The rational side of my mind screamed warnings, urging me to retreat to the safety and familiarity of the known trails. But the ranger in me, the man who had sworn an oath to protect and serve, knew that there was no turning back. With each step, the cave loomed larger in my view. The air grew heavier, as if saturated with the weight of unspoken secrets and ancient fears. The silence around me deepened, a void that seemed to swallow even the sound of my own breathing. The rustling in the underbrush was the first indication that I wasn't alone in this part of the forest. My heart rate accelerated, every sense sharpening, attuned to the slightest sound, the smallest movement. Then, breaking through the eerie calm, a figure emerged from the gloom, her sudden appearance nearly knocking me off balance. It was a woman, her appearance disheveled, hair wild and tangled, eyes wide with a terror that was almost palpable. She stumbled forward, her steps unsteady, before collapsing at my feet, her breathing ragged and desperate. I instinctively crouched beside her, my ranger training kicking in. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to her frantic gasps as I tried to soothe her, to bring her back from the brink of hysteria. Gradually, her breathing began to steady, the wild look in her eyes dimming as she became aware of her surroundings. "What's your name? Where are the others?" I asked, my voice firm yet gentle, hoping to glean some understanding of the situation. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the remnants of fear. "Emily," she managed to say, her voice a trembling whisper. "I'm Emily. We were reporters. We came to do a story on the cave, about its secrets. Steve, he was our guide." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They had ventured into the forbidden part of the forest, lured by the allure and mystery of the cave, despite the dangers. My heart sank with each word she uttered, the gravity of the situation becoming increasingly apparent. As Emily's breathing normalized, I helped her to sit up, checking her for injuries. Her clothes were torn, dirt and leaves clinging to the fabric. But she seemed physically unharmed, albeit shaken. I looked into Emily's eyes, seeing the trauma of her experience etched into her gaze. The need to find the others, to understand what had happened here, pressed heavily upon me. I gently probed for more information. "Can you tell me what happened? Where are the others?" Sitting beside Emily, her figure small and fragile against the vastness of the forest. I listened intently as she continued her harrowing tale. Her voice was a mere whisper, a delicate sound that seemed at odds with the chilling stories she recounted. They had started their day with a sense of adventure, setting up their equipment to film near the mouth of the cave. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the chatter of excited voices and the clatter of camera gear. But as they approached the cave, something inexplicable occurred. A strange, almost hypnotic pull emanated from the depths of the cave, drawing them inexorably closer. Emily's description of resisting this force was haunting. She had stopped at the very edge of the abyss, her feet rooted to the ground as if by some unseen anchor, while her companions, including Steve, were helplessly drawn into the cave's dark embrace. Her voice trembled as she recounted what happened next. She described the eerie silence that fell over the cave's entrance, a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. Then, the screams began, distant and muffled, as if coming from the very bowels of the earth. The pleas for help, the sounds of terror, echoed from the cave, painting a picture of unimaginable horror. Emily's eyes, wide with remembered fear, flickered with the light of the campfire. She spoke of Steve emerging from the darkness, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes empty of life. He stood at the mouth of the cave, a ghostly figure, beckoning her to join him. His voice, once warm and familiar, now carried an unnatural, compelling tone that tugged at her very soul. She recounted the struggle within her, the almost overwhelming desire to heed Steve's call, to step into the darkness beside him. It was a battle of wills, one she had narrowly won, managing to turn and flee into the safety of the forest. The fear in Emily's eyes as she looked at me was palpable. Her hands trembled as she clutched at her torn jacket, her body language speaking of trauma and deep-seated terror. She pleaded with me, her voice breaking, to go into the cave and rescue her friends, her colleagues, and Steve. She held onto a sliver of hope that they were still alive, that they could still be saved from whatever nightmare had claimed them in the depths of the cave. Emily's account, laden with fear and desperation, left a heavy weight in my heart. The cave, already shrouded in mystery and dread, now felt even more ominous. Despite her pleas, I knew that venturing into the cave without proper preparation was a risk too great. The safety of Emily, myself, and the potential survivors was paramount. We made our way back to the ranger cabin, the journey marked by silence and the heavy tread of our steps. Upon reaching the safety of the cabin, I wasted no time in contacting the sheriff. I relayed the situation in as much detail as possible, my voice steady but underlined with urgency. Emily, still visibly shaken, sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes distant, lost in the horror of her experience. The arrival of dawn brought with it the sheriff and a specialist he had enlisted, equipped with a solution tailored for our situation. A small, sophisticated drone, equipped with a camera and remote control, was to be our eyes and ears into the unknown depths of the cave. Emily, in no condition to face the cave again, stayed behind at the cabin, her recovery from the ordeal a slow, painstaking process. We gathered at the mouth of the cave, the morning light casting long shadows across the ground. The drone, a compact piece of technology, buzzed with a quiet hum as the specialist made the final adjustments. The anticipation was palpable, a mix of hope and fear, as we prepared to uncover the secrets of the cave without endangering any more lives. As the drone embarked on its journey, delving into the cave's mouth, the three of us huddled around the small screen that displayed its live feed. The drone's light cut through the darkness, illuminating the damp, gnarled rocks that formed the cave's interior. The view was a stark contrast to the bright morning outside, a reminder of the different world that lay beneath our feet. Our eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching every twist and turn the drone took. The cave's interior was a labyrinth of passages and chambers, its walls slick with moisture. The drone navigated the space with precision, its camera capturing every detail, yet revealing nothing but the natural formations of the cave. The tension in the air grew with each passing minute, the screen showing nothing but the barren, rocky terrain of the cave. The sheriff, a man of few words, watched intently, his expression one of concentration and concern. The specialist, his fingers deftly controlling the drone, was focused on the task, his brow furrowed in concentration. As the drone ventured deeper, the silence in the cave was overwhelming, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the quiet whir of the drone's propellers. The atmosphere was oppressive, the darkness seemingly absorbing the light from the drone, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The journey of the drone felt like an eternity, each second stretching out as we waited for any sign of Steve or the missing campers. The drone's journey into the cave had been uneventful until that moment. Shadows flickered across the feed, transient and elusive, like phantoms in the dark. My heart raced as something white briefly appeared within the frame, a fleeting glimpse that set my nerves on edge. Amidst the rocky terrain and eerie silence of the cave, the drone then uncovered something more tangible. An abandoned camera, its lens staring blankly into the abyss, and a pair of boots, discarded and forlorn. The realization hit hard. These were the operator's gear, silent witnesses to an untold story. However, just as we leaned in closer to the screen, hoping to uncover more clues, the specialist's voice cut through the tension. He announced the onset of severe signal interference, a technical obstacle that threatened our mission. The drone, an expensive and sophisticated piece of equipment, was at risk of being lost to the cave's mysterious depths. After a brief, intense discussion, we decided to retrieve the abandoned camera. It could hold vital information, clues to what had befallen the missing group. The drone's mechanical claws delicately lifted the camera, but as it did, the feed became erratic, the image jumping and flickering on the screen. The drone began its retreat, but then, in a turn of events that seemed almost unthinkable, it stopped abruptly. The screen filled with static, a chaotic dance of black and white that obscured our view. It was as if the drone was being held back by an unseen adversary, an invisible force that defied logic and reason. We watched in disbelief as the drone was slowly dragged back into the depths of the cave. The tension in the air was palpable, a mix of fear and frustration. The static on the screen grew more intense, a visual representation of our growing sense of dread. And then, in a final act of defiance, the camera slipped from the drone's grasp. We heard the sound of it clattering onto the rocky floor, the noise echoing through the cave's chambers and into our ears. The feed went completely dark, the screen now a blank canvas of black. The specialist, his face a mask of disbelief and disappointment, tried in vain to re-establish a connection. But it was clear that the drone was lost, swallowed by the cave's insatiable appetite for secrets. The retrieval of the camera, lying ominously close to the cave's entrance, was a moment driven by sheer instinct. The fear that had been a cold whisper in my spine turned into a roaring torrent as I rushed into the cave. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a loud drum in the eerie silence of the cave. The urge to delve deeper was strong, an almost magnetic pull, but I resisted, focusing solely on the task at hand. As I grabbed the camera, the cold, hard ground beneath my feet serving as a stark reminder of the cave's unforgiving nature. A guttural growl echoed from the depths of the cave. It was a sound that spoke of ancient terrors, of things best left undiscovered. Without looking back, I sprinted out of the cave, the sound of my own footsteps a frantic rhythm in my flight to safety. Back at the cabin, the sheriff, the specialist, and I sat in a heavy silence, each of us processing the day's eerie events. Our minds were a whirlwind of confusion and fear, grappling with the reality that the cave was not just a geological formation, but something alive, something malevolent. I held the camera, its weight in my hands a tangible link to the missing group. It was a beacon of hope in the thick fog of despair that had settled upon us. As we gathered around the small TV in the cabin, the footage from the camera began to play, casting a flickering light in the dim room. The screen showed Emily, her face illuminated by the camera's light, narrating something about the cave. Her voice was steady at first, but then it faltered, trailing off into an unsettling silence. The abrupt stop in her narration sent chills down my spine. The silence a suffocating blanket that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The camera panned to Steve and the other reporter, their expressions frozen, their eyes vacant. They stood motionless, like statues, their breaths held in a moment of suspended reality. The air in the cabin grew heavy, the tension palpable as we watched the screen, transfixed by the bizarre scene unfolding before us. Then, without warning, they began to move. Their steps were slow, deliberate, yet devoid of any human warmth or intention. It was as if they were being controlled by some unseen force, their bodies mere vessels for a will that was not their own. They moved towards the cave, their movements synchronized, a disturbing dance of puppets on strings. The footage continued, the cameraman's movements synchronized with the others, a macabre procession led by Emily, with Steve at the forefront. They moved in single file, drawn inexorably into the cave's gaping maw. The camera, held by the last person in line, cast a solitary beam of light, an eerie illumination for their descent into the unknown. My earlier impressions from the drone footage now seemed an understatement. Viewing the cave through this lens, the environment felt even more unnatural, more sinister. The cave's interior resembled less a natural formation and more an abandoned mine. The walls and the ground, everything bore unmistakable signs of human alteration, of being man-made, shaped by tools and hands long forgotten. Then, the camera revealed a sight that sent a chill down my spine. The ground was littered with bones, a macabre tableau of both human and animal remains. They lay scattered, discarded carelessly, as if the cave itself was a grave, a final resting place for the unfortunate. The grotesque nature of the scene was overwhelming, but it was what happened next that seared itself into my memory, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. The camera panned, and for a moment, the light caught something in the darkness. Figures, barely discernible, moving among the bones. They were hunched, their movements unnatural, almost animalistic. The light glinted off their eyes, a brief flash of reflection that spoke of a malevolent awareness. The footage from the camera played on, revealing a scene that defied all logic and understanding. The human-like figures, their skin an unnatural shade of pale, almost translucent, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. One by one, they approached the members of the group, their hands reaching out with an eerie gentleness. Steve was the first to be led away. The figure that approached him extended a hand, which he took without any sign of resistance. They disappeared together into the darkness, a sight that was both chilling and mesmerizing. The reporter and Emily followed, each guided away by these haunting figures, their movements seemingly devoid of their own will. Finally, it was the cameraman's turn. The camera, now our only window into this nightmare, gave us a close-up view of the creatures. The light from the camera revealed skin so translucent that a network of blue veins was visible beneath. Their mouths were filled with sharp, almost transparent teeth, akin to those of a shark, but it was their fangs, covered in thin red vessels, that stood out starkly. Their faces, if they could be called that, were the stuff of nightmares. I saw their eyes, black and red, swirling pools of darkness that seemed to draw in all light. The low, purring sound that emanated from them filled the cabin, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. The creature reached out for the cameraman, and in that moment, the camera fell from his grasp. The footage became a chaotic tumble of images, ending with the final shot of a pair of feet, the cameraman's, disappearing into the dark. The screen went black, plunging the cabin into silence. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, a stark contrast to the horrors we had just witnessed. The sheriff, the specialist, and I sat motionless, each of us processing the nightmarish reality that the footage had unveiled. The creatures in the cave were unlike anything we had ever seen or imagined. Their presence, their very existence, was a mystery that defied all rational explanation. The sight of the group being led away, one by one, was a haunting image that would linger in my mind, a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers that lurked within the cave. The unsettling footage had left me with a vortex of questions that whirled chaotically in my mind. The nature of these pale, otherworldly creatures, their motives, and the fate of those they had taken. All these thoughts spun in my head, each more troubling than the last. And then, there was Emily. The puzzle of her escape, her story, her silence about these beings. It all gnawed at me, a persistent itch that demanded to be scratched. I had left Emily resting in a room, her state fragile but seemingly safe. Now, with a sense of urgency propelling me, I made my way to the room. The door swung open to reveal a scene that froze the blood in my veins. Emily's hair was scattered carelessly on the floor, strands of it spread in a chaotic array. But it was the pieces of human skin that sent a shiver down my spine. They lay there, small, flaky remnants of a horror too deep to comprehend. And there, on the bed, lay a figure that was once Emily. Her body was pale, almost translucent, bald, and utterly still, as if in a deep slumber. Her transformation was shocking, aligning her more with the creatures from the cave than with any human. A wave of fear washed over me, its cold grip tightening around my heart. I stepped forward, my movements slow and cautious. There was a glimmer of hope that Emily, despite her transformation, might still possess enough humanity to explain what had transpired in the cave. But as I approached, Emily's senses, now seemingly heightened beyond human norms, detected my presence. Her eyes snapped open, black and red, mirroring those of the creatures in the footage. She emitted a low, guttural sound, primal and unsettling. In a flash, she leaped from the bed and hurtled toward the window. The glass shattered under her force, the sound piercing the silence of the night. I stood there, stunned, as Emily vanished into the darkness, her form a fleeting shadow against the backdrop of the forest. The realization dawned on me. Emily had become one with the cave and its inhabitants. The cave was no longer just her refuge. It was her home. She had escaped into the woods, and I knew exactly where she was heading. Back to that cavernous abyss that had claimed her. The room felt oppressively empty in her absence, the remnants of her transformation a stark reminder of the nightmarish reality we were facing. I stood there, in the midst of the chaos, my mind racing to piece together the fragments of this ever-deepening mystery. The thunderous crash of lightning outside the window was like a punctuation mark to my story, its boom resonating through the room. My grandchildren, their young faces a canvas of fear and suspense, reacted with screams, the tension built up by the story finding its release. Lily, the youngest, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination, approached me, seeking comfort in the familiar, reassuring presence of her grandfather. "Grandpa, you made it all up, didn't you? After all, such a cave doesn't exist. These creatures don't exist?" Her voice was a soft, trembling melody, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. I smiled at her, a gentle, affectionate curve of my lips that I hoped would ease her fears. Stroking her hair, I reassured her. "Of course, Lily. Grandpa just wanted to scare you a bit. I'm sorry about that. Old joker that I am." My words were a balm to her rattled nerves. I gathered her into my arms, her small body warm and real, a reminder of the joy and innocence that life held. We decided then to move to a lighter, happier activity, eating cake. The sweet, comforting ritual of sharing a treat was a perfect way to dispel the remnants of the scary story, to bring back smiles and laughter. Later that night, when the grandchildren were tucked into their cribs, their breathing deep and peaceful, a testament to their journey into dreamland, I found myself drawn to my office. There, hidden away from the world, lay reminders of a past I had long carried with me, Steve's picture and the camera with the footage of that mysterious cave. These items had been my silent companions, a weight of guilt and unanswered questions that I had borne for too long. The night, still and dark, felt like the right time to let go, to release the ghosts of the past. I took Steve's picture, its edges worn from the passage of time, and held it for a moment. The image, a frozen moment of a life lost to the mysteries of the cave, stared back at me. With a heavy heart, I placed it in the fireplace, watching as the flames began to consume it, the picture curling and blackening, a final farewell to a friend and a chapter of my life. Then came the camera, its lens that had captured horrors beyond comprehension. It was time to destroy the tapes, to rid the world of the nightmares they held. I dismantled the camera, its parts clattering onto the table, and then, with a finality that felt like a closing of a book, I placed them into the fire. The flames danced and flickered, consuming the remnants of a past that had haunted me. I watched as the fire reduced them to ashes, the images, the memories, the guilt, all turning to smoke and disappearing into the night. As I stood there, watching the last embers die out, I felt a sense of release, a lifting of a burden I had carried for too long. The cave, with its mysteries and horrors, was now a closed chapter, a story told and ended. The night was silent, the storm having passed, leaving a sense of calm and peace. I turned off the lights in my office and made my way to my room, feeling lighter, unburdened. The story of the cave was over, its secrets now just ashes in the fireplace. It was time to move on, to embrace the present and the future, to cherish the moments with my family, to live in the light, away from the shadows of the past.
Story 2.
I remember that summer with a clarity that often evades other memories of my early 20s. It was a time when the days stretched long and lazy before us. My friends and I lived in a rhythm dictated by academic calendars and the pulsing beat of city life. On one particularly sweltering day, as the city baked under a relentless sun, we found refuge in a quaint cafe tucked away in a quieter part of town. The cafe, with its mismatched furniture and walls adorned with local art, a place where we'd while away hours over iced coffees and aimless chatter. It was there we met Nikki. She breezed into the cafe like a gust of cool wind, her laughter ringing clear and her eyes sparkling with an irrepressible vivacity. Nikki was one of those rare people who radiated warmth and charisma, drawing others to her almost effortlessly. She joined our table, invited by a mutual friend, and within minutes, it was as if she'd always been part of the group. In the weeks that followed, Nikki became an integral part of our circle. Her wit was as sharp as her infectious humor, and she had a knack for storytelling that could leave us hanging on her every word. We would gather around our usual table, the aroma of coffee in the air, and Nikki would tell us stories about her childhood in a small town far from the bustling city. As summer vacation loomed, Nikki invited us to spend a week at her family's place in her hometown. The idea was met with lukewarm enthusiasm at first. None of us were particularly keen on leaving the comfort of the city for a sleepy, unknown town. Sensing our hesitation, Nikki's eyes took on a mischievous glint. "Let me sweeten the deal," she said, leaning in to share a secret. "There's a legend in my town. They say there's a real vampire living in the neighborhood who preys on both animals and humans." We laughed, of course. The idea was ludicrous, something out of a gothic novel, not real life. But there was something in the way Nikki told the story, her voice dropping to a hush, her eyes alight with a mix of fear and excitement that made us pause. Curiosity, that most human of traits, began to take root. So, we agreed. We decided to journey to this small, unknown town, if only to break the monotony of our city lives. A few days into our stay in Nikki's hometown, the novelty of being away from the city began to wear off, replaced by a sense of peaceful monotony. The town, with its narrow, winding streets and quaint houses, seemed to exist in a bubble, untouched by the rush of the outside world. Our days were spent exploring the local sights, with Nikki as our enthusiastic guide, sharing stories and legends of her town. The idea to camp in the forest came up spontaneously one evening, as we sat around Nikki's kitchen table, the remnants of a hearty meal laid out before us. The forest, a vast expanse of dense trees and winding trails, bordered the town. Equipped with backpacks laden with provisions, our sleeping bags rolled tightly, and a large tent that promised to be a challenge to set up, we set out towards the forest. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. We found a clearing near a wild lake, the water, a clear, deep blue that promised a refreshing escape from the summer heat. Setting up the tent proved to be an adventure in itself. Nikki took charge, directing us with a mix of amusement and exasperation as we fumbled with the poles and canvas. Eventually, the tent stood, albeit a little lopsided, a testament to our collective effort. The lake was a welcome respite, its waters cool and invigorating. We swam and splashed around, the cares of the world seemingly a million miles away. The picnic that followed was simple: sandwiches, fruit, and cold drinks. But in that moment, it felt like a feast. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a hush fell over our group. The playful atmosphere of the day gave way to a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to happen. We gathered around a makeshift fire, the flames casting a warm glow on our faces. Nikki, with a flair for drama, began to tell the story of the vampire, her voice a low, captivating murmur that seemed to blend with the crackling of the fire. "Simon," she said, "was a boy shadowed by misfortune from his first breath. His mother, a vibrant soul loved by all, passed away giving birth to him. In this town, where superstitions run as deep as the roots of the old forest, people whispered of a curse." She paused, and in that silence, the forest seemed to lean in, as if eager to hear more about Simon. "His childhood," Nikki continued, "was marked by illness and solitude. He was in the hospital a lot, couldn't get better. He was raised by his father, a man broken by grief yet devoted to his son. But tragedy struck again. His father was found dead under the most bizarre circumstances." Nikki's voice dropped to a whisper, compelling us to lean closer. "The body was... It was as if every drop of life had been drained from him." A shiver ran through me, and I wasn't alone. Around the fire, I saw my friends pull their jackets tighter, glancing uneasily into the shadows cast by the flickering flames. Nikki's eyes, reflecting the fire's dance, held a somber depth. The police were baffled. No signs of struggle. No clues to what happened. It was as if the life had been sucked out of him, leaving behind a husk. She looked around our circle, her gaze lingering on each of us. After the bewildering discovery of his father's lifeless body, an event that shook our small town to its core, young Simon was taken in by his grandmother. I still remember the first time I saw her. She was an enigmatic figure, her back straight as an arrow, her eyes sharp and piercing. Despite her advanced age, she moved with an energy that belied the wrinkles etching her face. The townsfolk had always been wary of her. I recall hearing hushed conversations at the local diner where people speculated about her age and origins. Some joked that she had been around when the town was founded, a comment that seemed less like hyperbole with each passing year. Her resilience and vigor were subjects of much speculation and unease. Simon, once a frail and sickly child, began to change under her care. It was gradual at first, a newfound color in his cheeks, a brightness in his eyes. But soon, the transformation became undeniable. He grew stronger, healthier. The change in Simon was the talk of the town, neighbors theorizing about the sudden shift. The most persistent rumor was unsettling. They said his grandmother, whom some whispered to be a witch, was adding human and animal blood to Simon's milk. It was a ridiculous idea. Other residents thought so. But pets did start going missing in the town. The rumors about his grandmother intensified. Some said she was seen wandering the woods at night. Others claimed to have found strange symbols etched into the trees near her home. The tales were many, each more fantastical than the last. But the undercurrent of fear was real. The days in our town seemed to stretch longer after Simon's transformation under his grandmother's care. His behavior became increasingly peculiar, only adding to the swirling rumors. He rarely ventured out during the day, and the townsfolk noticed a peculiar pattern. Simon could only be seen wandering the streets after sunset, his figure a fleeting shadow in the twilight. The rumors about him running around town at night like an animal weren't unfounded. Old Mr. Jenkins, who lived 2 houses down, swore he saw Simon one night. He said Simon's eyes glowed in the dark, a pair of luminescent orbs that seemed to pierce through the night's veil. Simon's grandmother, the enigmatic figure at the center of so many tales, passed away suddenly. Her death sent shockwaves through the town. Many had thought her to be almost immortal, a constant in our ever-changing world. Her demise was as mysterious as her life, leaving behind more questions than answers. But it was Simon's disappearance that truly unsettled the town. He wasn't found at his grandmother's house or anywhere in the neighborhood. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no trace of Simon. The once omnipresent rumors began to wane, replaced by a silence that was almost as disconcerting. People started to move on, the mystery of Simon and his grandmother slowly receding into the background of our daily lives. The night was deepening around our campfire, and Nikki's voice seemed to be the only thing anchoring us to reality as she continued the story of the strange occurrences that followed Simon's grandmother's death. The flames flickered, casting ghostly shadows on our faces as we listened, rapt and unsettled. A few months after the old woman passed away, Nikki said, her voice taking on a somber tone. The town was shaken by a series of gruesome discoveries. She described how it started with livestock, cows from the local farms found lifeless, their bodies drained and withered in a way that was eerily reminiscent of Simon's father's death. The air around us felt colder as she spoke of the growing unease in the town. Pets began to disappear. Cats, dogs, even birds from their cages, only to be found in the same desiccated state. The townsfolk, already on edge from the rumors surrounding Simon and his grandmother, started to whisper of a curse, a malevolent force lurking in the shadows. The horror escalated when the first human victim was found. It was a hiker, Nikki recounted, well known in town. He had gone into the woods and never came back. The body, when found, bore the same disturbing signs, as if every ounce of life had been sucked out of it. A palpable fear had gripped the town, Nikki explained. People were afraid to venture out after dusk. The police, once dismissive of the townspeople's superstitions, were now compelled to act. They organized search parties, patrolled the streets at night, and warned everyone to stay vigilant, Nikki said. The hunt for what was now being called the monster killer was underway, an ominous phrase that seemed to hang in the air like a dark cloud. That's when it all started to unravel. the threads of speculation and rumor weaving into a tapestry of fear and accusation. Nikki's voice, steady and solemn, filled the air as she continued her tale by the dying embers of our campfire. At first, it was just whispers, Nikki said, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. But then, more and more people began to believe that Simon was behind it all. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. They said that when his mother was cursed, Simon had been reborn as something else in her womb. A monster. A vampire, Nikki continued, almost hesitantly, as if saying the word aloud gave it power. Fed by his mother's blood, he became a full-fledged creature of the night. The story took a darker turn as Nikki described Simon's alleged escape. He knew he was being hunted, that he couldn't stay in the forest or the town. Her voice was a whisper now, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. So, he left. But not forever. Sometimes, Nikki said, her gaze distant, he comes back, and that's when the eerie events begin. She spoke of nights when the people living near the forest would hear the sound of a child sobbing. At first, they would rush out to help, but the crying would stop abruptly, as if it were never there. Days after the mysterious crying, murders would occur in the town. They would last about a week, and then, as suddenly as they began, they would stop. It's as if Simon gets bored or satiated, and then he disappears, leaving the town in an uneasy quiet. I looked around at my friends, their faces half lit by the fire, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. As Nikki's story drew to a close, the fire had dwindled to a mere smolder, casting long, flickering shadows across our small circle. Years later, of course, it all became legendary, she said, her voice now a mere murmur against the backdrop of the nocturnal forest. But even now, when townspeople hear a baby crying in the woods, they don't think it's just an animal or the wind. They think it's him, Simon. They tie up their cattle near the forest, she said, as a sort of sacrificial offering, hoping Simon will feed on them and leave the townspeople unharmed. The idea was chilling, a ritual born of fear and superstition, a testament to the power of the legend that had grown around Simon. Nikki looked around at our faces, lit intermittently by the dying fire. He's expected to come in the next few days, she added, a seriousness in her tone that I hadn't heard before. We should be careful. We could try to see him, but we should do it just before dawn, for our own safety. As we prepared for bed, the story hung heavily in the air around us. I could tell by the quiet, contemplative expressions of my friends that they too were processing the tale, each lost in their thoughts. Lying in my tent, I listened to the sounds of the night. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft murmur of my friend's breathing. The story of Simon, this boy turned into a creature of the night, seemed to merge with the darkness around us, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation and dread. That night was restless for me, fraught with unsettling dreams that clung to the edges of my consciousness, even as I awoke. In my dreams, I wandered through a landscape of blued and dried corpses, a nightmarish vista that seemed to stretch on endlessly. I woke up with a start, my shirt clinging to me, damp with sweat. The tent felt stifling, almost suffocating. I needed air to escape the remnants of the dream that seemed to linger in the close confines of the tent. Slipping out quietly so as not to disturb the others, I found myself in the cool embrace of the night. The sky above was a tapestry of stars, a stark contrast to the darkness of my dream. In the city, such a view was rare, the lights often drowning out the celestial display. Here, it was a breathtaking sight. As I sat near our dwindling campfire, my eyes tracing the constellations above, a sound broke the stillness of the night, a quiet, plaintive crying. It was so faint, I thought I might have imagined it, but then it came again, unmistakable this time. A baby crying. Curiosity, mingled with a sense of adventure, spurred me to my feet. Everyone else was asleep, their breathing steady, and even in the quiet of the night. The story Nikki had shared flickered in my mind, but I pushed aside the unease it brought. Grabbing my smartphone, I thought I might capture something, anything, that could explain the crying. I didn't venture far from our camp. The forest was a different world at night, shadows dancing between the trees, the sounds of nocturnal creatures a soft backdrop. And then I saw him, a boy, about 10 years old, standing near a tree. He was rubbing his ears with his hands, crying. The supernatural haze I half expected to see was absent. He looked like any ordinary child, lost and frightened. He was dressed only in a tank top and shorts, barefoot, his small frame shivering in the cool night air. My instincts as an older brother kicked in. I rushed over to the child, concern overriding any lingering fear from Nicky's story. I draped my jacket over his small shoulders, trying to offer some comfort. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," I said, my voice soft and reassuring. The child looked up at me, his hands falling away from his face. That's when I saw it. His tears weren't the usual clear drops, but a startling, vivid red. Blood. He was crying bloody tears. A cold shiver ran down my spine, my heart pounding in my chest. Every horror story, every urban legend I'd ever heard, paled in comparison to the sight before me. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. The boy with the bloody tears, standing so close, had to be Simon, the vampire from Nicky's stories. Fear gripped me, icy and sharp. My voice, shrill with terror, shattered the stillness of the dawn. "Help, vampire!" The next second was a blur. Simon, or the boy I believed to be Simon, bolted away with a speed that defied reality. It was as if one moment he was there, and the next, he was just a vanishing shadow among the trees. My friends, roused from their sleep by my screams, emerged from their tents, sleepy and disgruntled. The early morning air was chilly, and they wrapped themselves in blankets, irritation evident in their half-awake faces. "What's going on?" Mike asked, rubbing his eyes, trying to make sense of the situation. I was panting, my heart racing, as I tried to explain. "I saw him, Simon, the vampire. He was crying blood," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. Their reactions were a mix of disbelief and annoyance. Sarah, always the practical one, frowned. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming? It's been a long night with all those stories." But I was adamant. "I'm telling you, it was him." He ran off into the woods. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, my friends' skepticism grew. They suggested it was a nightmare, a trick of the light, or perhaps a lost child. But nothing could shake my conviction that what I had seen was real. From that day on, things changed. My friends started to make fun of me, playfully at first, but then with a hint of mockery. "There goes the vampire hunter," they'd jest, or, "Seen any blood-sucking creatures lately?" Despite their teasing, a part of me couldn't let go of what I'd seen. Every rustle in the bushes, every unexpected sound in the night, brought me back to that encounter. I spent my days replaying the moment over and over in my mind, questioning, analyzing, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't shake off the conviction that what I had experienced was real. The image of the boy with bloody tears was etched into my memory, a haunting reminder of a truth that everyone else refused to see.
Story 3.
"Oh my God, they're close. I need to hide. But where? Where can I find escape from them? I can hear them breaking down the doors. How many of them are there? I don't know. Lord save me, I'm scared. Oh no, they broke down the iron shutters. They're already inside. I can hear them coming up, coming toward me. I hear their heavy footsteps and their breathing. What do I do? How do I escape? How did this happen? How could I be in this situation? I know it's my own fault for being in this situation. I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have opened that damn envelope." It all started about a month ago. Picture a small, cluttered apartment in the heart of London. Shelves lined with unopened bills, tax documents, coffee-stained papers that had never found their way into a recycling bin. A laptop, overworked and overheating, groaned on the wobbly IKEA table that barely managed to fit into the congested space. This was my universe, my hermit kingdom. I'm Harry, a 28-year-old work-from-home office drone. You see, I'm a natural introvert. An endearing term my mom used was loner. Not married. No girlfriend, hell, not even a pet for company. The kind of guy whose coworkers vaguely recognize in Zoom meetings, but can't quite place in a physical office setting because I've hardly ever been there. My life wasn't exactly a thriller, far from it. It was dominated by a vicious cycle of sleep, work, eat, and repeat. an existence that was undeniably mundane and yet comfortably predictable. A stark contrast to the terror I now find myself in. One dreary evening, while I was parsing through the relentless waves of junk mail and past due bills, my eyes fell upon a strange burgundy-colored envelope. It was a peculiar anachronism in this age of emails and instant messaging. It was from a law firm in Ireland, which was odd since I had no connections as far as I knew with the Emerald Isle. With a sense of intrigue, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter, the weight of its words amplified by the seriousness of the font. It declared that a certain Mr. Archibald Wolfe had recently passed away and had bequeathed me, his only living relative, his sprawling mansion and estate up in Ireland. Archibald Wolfe? The name struck no chords in my memory. I had never met or heard of this man in my life. My parents had died when I was young, and I was raised in an orphanage. I was alone in the world, or so I thought. My brow furrowed, and I could feel the wheels in my head starting to churn, sparking to life like a rusty old engine. Surely this was a mistake, a clerical error, maybe even a scam. I called the law firm immediately, my voice wavering with a strange cocktail of anxiety and curiosity. After confirming my identity, the firm reassured me that the information was accurate. I was the sole inheritor of the Wolfe estate. My mind was in a whirlwind. One minute I was buried under a mountain of bills in my cramped apartment, and the next, I was the owner of a mansion. A mansion. It seemed absurd, dreamlike, and yet there it was in black and white. The prospect was tempting, the allure of an escape from my monotonous life, the idea of a fresh start. I couldn't deny the attraction. I remember looking around my apartment, the bare walls staring back at me with a cold indifference. My gaze fell on the stack of overdue bills, the constant reminder of my financial struggle. I felt a sudden wave of defiance. Maybe this was my chance, my opportunity to turn a new page, to redefine my narrative. With a determined sigh, I made my decision. In hindsight, the gravest mistake of my life. I packed my essentials, submitted my indefinite leave application, and booked a one-way ticket to Ireland. Mixed emotions filled me as I studied the pictures attached to the letter. The mansion that now supposedly belonged to me was a stately, antiquated behemoth. Ivy crept up its gray stone walls, adorning the large Gothic windows. The images captured an eerie beauty of the place, a sense of isolated grandeur that appealed to me. It was a world away from my shoebox apartment in London, a tantalizing vision of an alternate life that was now within my grasp. It was an opportunity, I thought, to finally turn the tables on my mounting debts and relentless financial struggles. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. As I learned from the letter, the man who had left me this inheritance was my uncle, a brother to my mother, who had departed from this world long before I was old enough to know her. I found myself mourning a man I never knew, and a family connection I had long been ignorant of. My uncle was apparently a collector, a connoisseur of rare things, filling his mansion with a treasure trove of artifacts and curiosities. The thought of inheriting not just a house, but a collection of potentially valuable items had my heart racing. The thrill of this unexpected fortune was in stark contrast to the dull rhythm of my life. An inheritance could be my lifeline, my escape from the relentless clutch of financial difficulties. I couldn't help but smile, a genuine smile, one that hadn't graced my face in a long while. Jackpot, I thought to myself, my heart heavy with a sudden surge of hope. For once, it felt like Lady Luck was finally shining her radiant smile on me. My reasons for accepting this inheritance weren't entirely materialistic. There was a burgeoning curiosity within me, a desire to learn about this family I never knew I had. This was a part of my history, a piece of the puzzle that was my past, and it was calling to me. Still, there was an air of mystery shrouding it all. Why would my uncle, whom I'd never met or spoken to, leave his entire estate to me? And why was I only finding out about him now? These were questions that needed answers. Answers, I hoped, I would find in the grand halls of my newly acquired mansion. My journey from a mundane existence to the unexpected inheritance of an ancestral mansion felt like a thrilling novel. As my plane cut through the sky, I had no idea that I was heading into a web of mysteries and horrors, dark and twisted, that were lying in wait for me. While I was eager to get to the mansion, I was unaware of the chilling turn my life was about to take. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, but not in the way I had hoped. The plane journey was followed by a long drive through dense forests and winding roads. The village, a small settlement shrouded in a thick, unyielding mist, lay a few miles away from the homestead. It was as if the clouds had descended, blanketing the world in a hazy white mantle. The path was scarcely traveled, reinforcing a sense of isolation that tickled at the back of my mind. But I shook off the unease, reminding myself that this was a part of my new adventure. I decided to make a stop at a local inn to gather some information about my inheritance and get a more precise direction to the mansion. As I walked in, the rustic charm of the place did little to ease the curious glances that met me. Eyes shifted uncomfortably, conversations quieted, and an unsettling silence swept over the room as the locals turned to regard the stranger who just entered their domain. The innkeeper, a burly man with grizzled hair and a weather-beaten face, eyed me suspiciously. His eyes held a curious mix of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Wariness, perhaps? Mustering a smile, I approached him, trying to sound as amiable as possible. "Hello, sir. I'm Harry. I just got into town. I was hoping you might help me find my way to the old Wolf estate." The moment I mentioned the mansion, the innkeeper's eyes widened, and a palpable tension fell over the room. The whispers from the corner tables ceased. The villagers exchanged nervous glances as if my words had somehow disturbed the very air. The innkeeper leaned back, studying me more carefully this time. "You've got business with the Wolf estate?" he asked, a shadow of unease creeping into his voice. "Yes," I responded, my curiosity piqued by their reactions. "Actually, I've inherited the estate. I'm Archibald Wolf's nephew." Upon hearing this, a man seated at the bar counter, who had been nursing his beer all this while, suddenly looked up. His face turned a shade of white, and his eyes bore into me with a bitterness I couldn't comprehend. "You ought to leave, lad," he spat, his voice low but clear in the silent room. "Go back to wherever you came from, and never return." My eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "But why?" I tried to ask, only to be interrupted by the man's raised hand. "Don't ask questions. Just leave," he said, turning his gaze back to his drink, his lips curling into a hardened frown. Disappointment and a certain amount of unease settled in my stomach. Their reaction, their clear aversion to even talking about the estate, was unnerving. But by then, I'd already gleaned enough information to make my way to the mansion. Leaving the inn, I could feel their eyes on me, a heavy and foreboding presence that lingered long after I'd gotten back into my car. A knot of worry twisted in my gut, but I shook off the feeling. This was my inheritance, my chance at a new life, and I wasn't going to let the superstitious fears of the villagers stop me. So, I started my car, leaving the mistrustful stares of the villagers behind, driving off into the unknown. The winding path leading to the mansion twisted and turned through a dense, gnarled forest, where overgrown trees leaned ominously over the trail. The wind whistled through the branches, a haunting symphony that added to the mounting sense of anxiety. The secluded mansion slowly revealed itself, a monolithic structure shrouded in a gossamer veil of mist that added a spectral quality to its already foreboding facade. Gothic towers rose into the gloomy sky. Carved gables peered down at me, their stone faces weathered by time. It was as if the mansion itself was observing my arrival, watching me with a quiet, eerie intent. I swallowed hard, tamping down the unease that knotted in my gut. With a deep breath, I pushed the heavy wooden door open, and the mansion welcomed me with a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the rustling echo of my footsteps. The air smelled musty, ancient, and untouched, like the pages of a long-forgotten book. Determined, I began my exploration. The rooms were frozen in time, a tribute to a bygone era. Antique furniture occupied the spaces, bearing the intricate craftsmanship of the centuries. Priceless curios and trinkets filled the shelves, a testament to my uncle's peculiar tastes. As I walked deeper into the mansion, I discovered that some of the doors were locked. This, of course, ignited my curiosity. My eyes scanned the surroundings, eventually landing on a dusty old key lying on an oak desk. I picked it up, feeling the weight of its cold metal against my palm. A strange thrill of anticipation ran through me as I approached the nearest locked door. I slid the key into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. As I slowly turned it, an ominous creak echoed through the eerie silence, the sound like a whispered warning. Ignoring the chill running down my spine, I pushed the door open. It reluctantly gave way, revealing a dark corridor bathed in shadows. As I ventured into the hallway, the dim light from the open door behind me revealed the outlines of ancient portraits hanging on the walls. The portraits depicted men and women in outdated attire, their stern faces seemingly locked in a perpetual state of judgment. Their eyes were painted to appear motionless, yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that their gazes were tracking my every move. One portrait in particular caught my attention. It was a painting of a young girl whose eyes mirrored my own. Beside her were painted several other people, their faces blurred with time. My heart raced as I realized the girl in the painting was my mother. My secretive, yet loving mother. It was a face I hadn't seen in years, yet it was unmistakably hers. She'd always been vague about her past, only mentioning that she was from Ireland. But seeing her immortalized on the mansion's wall, it became clear that her lineage was older and far more complex than she had ever admitted. I was not only upset but also intrigued. Why would she hide such an important part of our history? I ventured further down the hallway, each step stirring the dust that lay in a thick layer on the hardwood floors. One particular door seemed to call to me, its wood aged and its handle cold to touch. With an uncertain hand, I pushed it open, revealing a forgotten room with dust-covered furniture and scattered papers. Flipping through the pages, I found records of our family tree, and the fact that our ancestors were somehow connected to the ancient kingdom of Osreg. My uncle must have done some research, I decided. I also came across records of some kind of curse associated with the ancient kingdom and its inhabitants. The diary spoke of the irrevocability of retribution for unholy deeds. One passage caught my attention. It read, "It is said that when Saint Patricius, Saint Patrick, preached Christianity in that land, there was one clan that opposed him more stubbornly than any other. These people sought in every way to offend both God and the saint, and when he preached the faith to them, as he did to others, and came to speak to them where they held their meetings, they decided to howl at him like wolves." Further into the diary, there were strange, unsettling sketches of animals with fur and grotesque heads. As I flipped through the pages, an animal howl echoed from outside the window. The sound was so unexpected and so close that I nearly dropped the diary. Goosebumps crawled over my skin, a cold shiver running down my spine. I was frightened, and despite my curiosity, I had to admit that I was overwhelmed. Deciding I'd had enough for one night, I decided to call it a day. I closed the journal and the door to my room, promising myself to return in the morning when the sunlight would make the past less frightening. For now, I needed to find a quiet corner of the massive, creepy mansion and try to sleep. As darkness took hold, a thunderstorm ensued. The wind howled like a wounded beast, its eerie song mingling with the booming thunder and the relentless drumming of rain against the mansion's cold stone walls. Inside, I lay shivering in the living room, the blanket pulled tight around me, the chill seeping into my bones, and the silence feeling heavier with each passing moment. The wind outside, the cryptic messages in my uncle's diary, the cold, stern faces looking down from the paintings, the villagers' apprehension, and the looming manor, everything left an unsettling imprint on my heart. Sleep eluded me as thoughts twisted and turned like specters in my mind. A seed of doubt had begun to take root, its tendrils snaking around my thoughts. What if the inheritance wasn't as benign as it seemed? What if my uncle had left me this house with some ulterior motive in mind? But what could that be? A sudden crash in the distance made me start, breaking the rhythmic cadence of the storm outside. Fear prickled at the base of my neck. It was coming from one of the far rooms. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. But the idea of cowering in the living room didn't sit well with me. I grabbed a flashlight, its beam dancing eerily on the mansion's old stone walls as I walked towards the source of the noise. With caution, I pushed open the door to find a shattered window, the frames clapping wildly against the wall under the force of the wind. Glass shards glittered ominously on the floor. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside and maneuvered my way towards the window. With a bit of struggle and a heavy book to hold it in place, I managed to shut it, blocking out the tempestuous wind. Just as I was beginning to relax, another noise pierced the storm's symphony. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from the floor above. A chill coursed down my spine, my blood turning to ice in my veins. I was alone in this massive mansion, trapped between the raging storm outside and the echoing footsteps from within. Could it be burglars? Or perhaps a wild animal seeking refuge from the storm? Or something more ominous? Fear twisted in my stomach, but I clung to the flashlight, my only source of light and comfort. Steeling myself, I decided to check out the living room and lock all the doors leading to the upper floors. If it was just a nocturnal animal or a stray gust of wind, I could lock myself safely and wait out the storm. My fingers were numb around the handle of the flashlight as I began to move down the hallway, each step resonating in the eerie silence of the mansion. Suddenly, I heard a screech that sounded like the screaming of 1,000 damned souls, echoing throughout the mansion. It was a door, its hinges groaning as it swung open. My heart pounded in my chest, matching the rhythm of the thunder outside. Slowly, with a sense of impending doom, I turned around. Out from the darkness of the room, a monstrous figure emerged. Its body was shrouded in thick, matted fur, and its eyes glowed with an inhuman light. Terror seized me, and a primal instinct to survive took over. I bolted, adrenaline fueling my steps. I sprinted into the living room, but to my horror, another shaggy creature lurked there. It snarled, its eyes glowing ominously as it noticed my presence. I froze, trapped between the two monstrous figures. The only thing I could think of was to grab the closest thing to me, a heavy glass vase, and hurl it at the beast in the living room. It roared in anger and flinched, momentarily distracted. Seizing the opportunity, I dashed for the staircase, the gnarled creatures hot on my heels. The old wooden stairs creaked and groaned under my weight, each step a terrifying beat in the symphony of my flight. I could hear their heavy breaths, almost feel their presence closing in on me. My heart pounded in my ears as I stumbled into one of the rooms, slamming the door shut behind me. Leaning against it, I strained to listen. The only sound was the thundering of my heart and the storm outside. I had escaped, but only by a hair's breadth. Rapidly, I barricaded the entrance. I used everything I could find: chairs, a heavy table from the adjacent room, anything that could possibly hold the creatures at bay. As I secured the last piece of furniture against the doors, I slid down to the floor, exhaustion seeping into my bones. A feeling of helplessness descended upon me, a shroud as heavy as the darkness around me. The light from the flashlight trembled in my hand, illuminating the unknown corners of the room. My heart pounded with a fear I had never known before. each beat screaming a silent prayer that the beasts wouldn't find me. And then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of doors being shattered, the creature's guttural growls echoing through the mansion. They were coming. I held my breath, my heart pounding louder than the storm outside. The monsters prowled through the rooms, their footsteps an ominous tattoo on the wooden floor. I heard one approach the door, its grunts growing louder. The door rattled under its monstrous strength. One knock, then another. My heart mirrored the dreadful rhythm, pulsing in sync with every hit. With each impact, the door seemed to bow under the weight of the creature. Any moment now and it would give way, leaving me at the mercy of the monstrous creature. And then, cutting through the dread, a high-pitched whistle pierced the air. It was deafening, filling every crevice of the mansion with its shrill sound. The pain was so intense that I clamped my hands over my ears, the flashlight dropping onto the floor. But the whistle continued to blare, drowning out every other sound. The deafening whistle continued to reverberate in the air, filling the room with its terrifying pitch. My head pounded in agony as I sank to the floor, the pain making the room spin around me. But then, I noticed the silence. The battering against the iron door had ceased. The growls, the howls, everything had quieted down. With a sense of disbelief, I moved towards the door, placing my ear against the cold iron. I strained to hear anything that could signal the presence of the beasts, but all I could hear was the shrill echo of the whistle. I felt a slight surge of hope. I slowly made my way towards the room's single window. The storm outside was lessening now, the thunder a distant rumble. And then I saw him, a solitary figure standing amidst the trees. He was holding a whistle to his lips, its metallic gleam catching the occasional flashes of the storm. I watched in awe as he blew into it again. The pain was immediate, sharp and blinding. I clutched my ears, wincing at the intensity of the sound. But as I opened my eyes, I saw something even more unbelievable. The monsters were coming out of the mansion. They looked like wolves, their shaggy fur dripping wet from the rain. One by one they sprinted into the woods, their lupine figures disappearing among the trees. The man stood firm, the whistle still in his hand, watching the beasts retreat. They did not attack him, did not even come close to him, as though he commanded an unseen authority over them. And then he looked up, his gaze piercing through the stormy night, and directly into the room where I was hiding. I froze, fear momentarily locking me in place. The man stood there for a moment longer before he turned around, disappearing into the woods just as the first rays of the morning sun began to illuminate the horizon. Exhausted, scared, and most importantly, alive, I gathered my belongings and fled the mansion. I didn't give a second glance at the looming manor, the inheritance, or the village. My rented car seemed like a safe haven, a refuge from the horrors of the night. I revved up the engine, the homestead disappearing in my rearview mirror. I had one thing in my mind: home. The inheritance, the village, the mansion. They had all faded away, becoming mere specters of a nightmare I wished to forget. I was heading home, away from the eerie whistle, away from the monstrous beasts, away from the haunting memory of a man in the woods. I wanted to forget everything like a bad dream,